Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Nothing But Nugs podcast. We are officially into the 2026-2027 off season. Thank you for joining us again. If you listened to our last episode or if you've been following us for some time, we are glad you're here. We're part of the Elevated Pulse Sports family of podcasts by the fans, for the fans, diehards only. So last week we talked about the NBA draft, talked about some mock picks that we had seen floating around the internet, talked about some stuff that's Nuggets related, what we'd like to see them do with the 26th overall pick. Eric and I, for the record, we're spot on. We were spot on with what we wanted the Nuggets to do, but it didn't really pan out the way we thought it would, did it, Eric?
It sure didn't. I mean, we both nailed it. I mean, that's kind of the good thing is, that's part of the reason why I was a little disappointed, right? Was because we spent the time kind of going through it, and I've got friends that watch, so I wanted to look good, look smart, look like we knew what we were talking about, and I was really happy when the Nuggets took Tarris Reed Jr. at 26, and then about 30 seconds later, my heart was shattered, and I found out that they traded him to the Spurs. So I guess that's the breaks with the NBA.
Yeah, man. And we were just talking about this beforehand, but like of all the teams, the Spurs, really? Now, there's obviously a little bit more probably we could dive on into with regard to that specific situation. Maybe there was a reason why it had to be the Spurs. But I mean, we talked about this last week. Of all the teams you're trying to make better, you're not trying to make the young competitive team who finished above you in the conference better. It's just not good on paper. So that was kind of rough. But I mean, as far as the NBA draft in general, we can start there on today's episode. I mean, some surprises probably compared to at least the mock draft we looked at last week. Was there anything that stuck out to you just looking across the general landscape of the NBA after the draft? Teams that you thought got better with the picks that they made, teams that you think kind of whiffed with the picks that they made? What are your takeaways from the draft earlier this week?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say until you see guys actually play. But there are picks that I really like. There are picks. I kind of scratched my head at Dallas with their first pick, taking the guy out of Michigan. I get it. They just hired the Michigan coach. I thought the guy that they were going to take was the center from Michigan. But overall, the things that stood out to me is, boy, there was a lot of freshman talent that came out in the draft. I think the first 10 picks, 11 picks, something like that, they were all freshmen, which I guess doesn't shock me. But, in the age that we live in, where you start to see, where we see players from overseas getting drafted and things like that, the fact that, it was pretty heavily college players, and most of them were freshmen picked in the first round. I thought that was interesting. I do think, man, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think that the Spurs they picked up a lot of good depth at the center position. We talked about it. I feel like I won't say they got the two best, but I think they got two of the best centers in the draft. And that's you just touched on it. They're the young team that was just in the finals. Gosh, do we need to make them better? But a lot of great talent. It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. I think for the most part, the first 5 to 7 picks, they were kind of in order with what we thought, and then after there, it shook up a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as far as the Spurs are concerned, look, I said it at the end of last week's episode. My top 3 for the Nuggets to take at pick 26, should they have been available, were Tarris Reed, Jaden Quaintance, and Joshua Jefferson in that order. And so for them to have drafted Tarris Reed just to ship him away to the Spurs was very, very disappointing for me. I was like, wow, spot on. The Nuggets, they're listening not only to us, obviously, because, they're huge fans of the Nothing But Nugs podcast if they're making that pick, but they're also just looking at their team and they're making very reasonable observations and making very reasonable decisions. That was my thought. Then they traded the pick away and I was like, all right, very interesting. But yeah, I mean, the Spurs, man, I guess this is the end of Luke Cornett, unfortunately, but I mean, man, they added one of the best defensive centers in the draft in Quaintance. And on top of that, they added a 6'10", 265-pound center who went to the championship this last season. So, I mean, it's very, very clear. And actually, if you put this even in the broader context, right? Who the Spurs, not the Spurs, it was the Thunder who picked Mara at 12, right? Yeah. The Thunder picked Mara, kind of a direct Wemby stopper. That was clearly the goal of that pick, right? The Spurs were like, hold on a second. We're not going to let you get off the hook that easy, which clearly explains the picks of Quaintance and the trade for Reed. So, I mean, as far as the Spurs are concerned, absolutely improved their front court. It's going to be tough for the Nuggets to keep up. Obviously, there's some other NBA news that we'll get to later on that I wanted to touch on, at least as it pertains to the Nuggets' size, especially recently. But as far as the Spurs are concerned, good for them. You mentioned someone else. Oh, yeah, Johnson to the Mavericks. I kind of thought something similar to you. I was like, maybe they'll take Mara because obviously Michigan is now, well, the former Michigan coach is their new head coach. But then I thought back on it some more. I was like, they have Derek Lively. And so they kind of feel like they have the center position on lock. Johnson is a solid pairing, I guess, alongside Cooper Flagg at the forward position. So I guess it kind of makes sense if that's what they're going for. But it was, yeah, that was kind of funny to watch on draft night, seeing Dusty draft one of his former Michigan stars at that pick. So, I mean, anything else stand out from this draft before we get into the Nuggets specifically? I think, what do you think about the fact that the Thunder traded for Bennett Sturts, right? Yeah, they did. Pick 16. Was that kind of a surprise for you?
So there's a lot of mixed signals with Bennett Sturts. I mean, I watched him at Iowa, but he played 4 years of college, I believe, on 4 different teams. I think he started out at a JUCO, if I'm not mistaken, and then kind of he moved around with his coach, who ultimately was at Drake and then at Iowa. I think he just doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that OKC is going to play. They already have Shea. Obviously, he's a point guard, or at least a guard. I think he certainly handles the ball a lot. They also, just made a trade, at the trade deadline and brought in another point guard. So it was kind of a head scratcher for me, but I do think that he is a solid point guard, to where, if he was on another team, he might get an opportunity to play, but I just don't see him coming in and immediately getting minutes.
Yeah, well, I mean, with some of the moves that the Thunder have made recently and the fact that, at least in the last few years, they love drafting these rookies that just get plugged right on into their system immediately. Maybe there's an argument that he sneaks in there, especially considering the Thunder got rid of Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins this week. Maybe there's a chance that he gets some time. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is when you're drafting rookies. He's a great shooter. There are definitely areas of his game that he definitely needs to improve. So we'll see how they balance all of that. But as far as Thunder and player development, I don't think they're too concerned about that. Something that stuck out to me was the Hawks. I think the Hawks had a very sneaky, solid draft. If you remember the mock draft from last week, we had seen that mock draft had them getting Kingston Flemings at 8 and then Henry Vesar at 23. They ended up being able to get Vesar in a trade with the Clippers in the second round at the back end, like pick 52 or 53. And they got Zuby Ejiofor, who you mentioned last week would have been a sneaky good pick for the Nuggets to get just because of his size at the forward spot. They managed to get better at the guard spot, obviously, at the forward spot. And I mean, for what it's worth, they got the guy that many people thought they could take as their backup center with their first round pick. They got him in the second round. And so sneaky good draft for the Hawks, quite honestly. It will obviously have to wait to see how those players pan out. But on paper, it's hard to have a more complete, solid overall night than the Hawks in many senses, quite honestly. But now let's talk about the Nuggets, obviously, because I mean, Pick number 26. We just talked about it a little bit. It's so disappointing, at least on paper, right? If I'm remembering correctly, they got pretty much 3 second-round picks out of that. They got pick 35, and then they got 2 future second-round picks. What do you think of this? Obviously, you're disappointed, like I am, that we got the guy that we said the Nuggets needed and then shipped him away. But as far as the package they got in return, obviously that pick 35 turned into Trayvon Brazil, and then we'll wait to see what happens with the 2 future second-round picks. But what are your initial thoughts about the package itself that the Nuggets got?
Outside of me hating it initially, because I hated it initially. I was so dead set on having Terrence Reed Jr. on the team. But, time gives me the opportunity to kind of see things through a different lens. And really, look, let's just be honest. The Nuggets are historically not a team that wants to pay the luxury tax. The Cronkies, they don't want to have that, extra large luxury tax bill. So the fact that they were able to essentially save themselves, that guaranteed contract that comes with a first-round pick, find somebody in the second round who they thought still kind of filled or met a lot of the needs that they were looking for, I think, it wasn't all bad. The fact that you also picked up, a couple of second-round draft picks in the future. Look, we all know draft picks are capital, right? They are. We heard rumors that the Nuggets were trying to move up in the draft to get, a guard. They didn't specify who it was, but they were trying to move up in the draft. I have a sneaky suspicion the reason they couldn't move up is because they didn't have any draft capital to be able to offer back. So anytime you start to add some of that draft capital, I think, those draft picks, they'll come in handy at some point. I don't think the plan for the Nuggets is to actually pick players with those draft picks in whatever years they, the picks were for. I think that those pieces are going to be pieces that they potentially add on to some sort of trade to either, bring in, we'll talk about it later, to either bring in another superstar or even to remove salary cap from the team. So I think it gives them a little bit more flexibility. And that's the kind of thing I think that, when you're just seeing red about your player that you picked not getting drafted or getting traded away right away, those are the things that you kind of miss. And, as I've sat back now and digested it for 3 or 4 days, that's kind of what I'm able to see through what the Nuggets were doing.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing we didn't get that trade that we looked at last week, right? Where you send Cam Johnson to the Hornets, for instance, and your first round pick in exchange for their pick at 18, I think it was, and a Grant Williams. That would have been a fantastic trade for them to make on draft night to move up. But as far as the package itself, well, I mean, at 35, you got a solid value big at the position that, I mean, relatively in the second round is a really solid pick. As far as the 2 other second round picks, you're absolutely right. That has to be turned into capital that's used this offseason to either move off of an expensive contract and free up cap space or to go bring in an immediate contributing star to help this team win in the near future, if not this season. But with that said, I mean, we might as well just introduce Nuggets Nation and the Nothing But Nugs podcast family to our 2 new Nuggets that were selected in the second round and just talk about them for a little bit. Now, at 35, we did mention that briefly. We selected Trayvon Brazil. Went to Arkansas. I'm just reading a scouting report that I found on Instagram, by the way. Pretty solid scouting report. The account that created it is Nuggets Country _. So you should go check it out. They make a lot of Nuggets related posts. But here's the post on Brazil. He's 23 years old. He was a senior, so he played a decent amount in college. I'm seeing here 5 seasons. See, it feels like for whatever reason that's the case with a lot of these guys. It just feels like there are a lot more older guys coming out of college the last few years. Maybe that has to do with COVID and how that impacted eligibility. But nonetheless, it helps the Nuggets, right? The Nuggets are looking for older guys who can come into the league and be more likely to contribute out of the gate. He plays forward. He's 6'9.5", so pretty much 6'10". He's about 225 pounds, 7'4" wingspan at 6'9.5", which is pretty impressive, and a 42-inch vertical on top of that. So dude is definitely an athlete. That's not questionable. As far as his college career, played 130 games, averaged about 25 minutes per game. Averaged in his senior year, we'll do senior year for this, 13 points per game, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal and a half a game, and a block and a half a game, on 62% true shooting, 34% from the 3-point line. So this is a guy, and I mean, Arkansas is a really good team too, right? If you think back to the last season, Arkansas was a very solid team. I mean, Darius Acuff Jr. went high in the first round. So this is a competitive team, and he was one of the best players on that team as well. As far as his strengths, his physical tools are obviously a strength, right? The wingspan, the vertical, he's got an NBA caliber athleticism, which is something we said the Nuggets needed. So it was good to see that they picked up a guy like that. He's good at finishing, shot 72% in transition as well, which is something that you love to see for a Nuggets team that likes to get out on the fast break and run. As far as finishing, also, I mean, 69% on putbacks. So he likes to get on into the paint and fight for rebounds and really get on the offensive glass, which is something that the Nuggets have very much needed the last few years, aside from Nikola Jokic and even Aaron Gordon. He's a stretch big. He has the ability to shoot. Shot 34% from 3. Not terribly incredible, but for a guy of his size, it's not terrible either. Defensive playmaking and versatility obviously come with this package as well. But as far as his weaknesses, people tend to say he struggles with physicality. Obviously, at 225 pounds and 6'10", he's kind of in a Deron Holmes type of category where he has the physical skills to be a good defender. The instincts are kind of there, but the body itself doesn't always follow. He also has gotten knocked for his inconsistency. Occasionally his effort. He's not a great shot creator really either. And so those are kind of the knocks on the guy that the Nuggets selected here at 35. But what are your initial thoughts on anything we just read there about Brazile or anything else that you'd seen online?
I mean, the things that excite me, it's things that we haven't really had since, well, especially with Peyton Watson and Aaron Gordon being injured last year. The length, the vertical athleticism, those types of things. He, I think, is going to bring some weak side rim protection, which was something that the Nuggets desperately needed last postseason. The big thing to me is just like his versatility. In theory, he's a guy who could play a backup 4. So we get some athleticism behind Aaron Gordon. If the Nuggets want to play small ball, he could potentially play, a small ball 5. I'm not saying that that's where they're going to play him, but it's fun to think about what those different options are. Again, I mentioned that weak side shot blocking. I do think he's going to bring some of that we've been missing. And then, the part that we really have missed just with Gordon's injuries is that dunker spot, the ability to have somebody be able to finish from that dunker spot. I don't think he's going to play a ton with Jokic on the court at the same time, but that's something that I also saw floated around. If the Nuggets aren't going to do this is not in the cards most likely, but if you saw some pictures this week from Jokic, he is looking pretty physically fit and trim. It just flashed in my mind, and I think I read it maybe from a Vic Lombardi post or something, where they were talking about, what if, just imagine a time where Joker can come in and play a 4 and then have somebody play the 5, so he's not having to go up against, the centers that he has to go up against. That was intriguing to me. I don't think that that's what they're going to do, but those are the things that kind of, adding somebody with this type of size and athleticism and defensive ability, they give you the options to be able to do things like that. And I think that that's huge, to be able to have that kind of versatility and be able to do that. The note that you mentioned, kind of, I read this too on his quote unquote motor. That's the one thing I do get kind of a little bit concerned with. look, in the NBA, you can't take plays off. When you take a play off, you find your way on the bench real quickly. So hopefully that's, more of just a maturity thing, college type of thing, and he'll grow out of that. But I think overall I'd give a solid B plus, somewhere in that ballpark as far as my grading.
Yeah, sure. I'll agree with that. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned Jokic at the 4 potentially in some sort of lineup, because we know the Nuggets like to put the double bigs lineup out there occasionally. Last year, maybe even a little bit more than what people would consider occasionally. But if you're thinking double bigs lineup again, I think the fit of Brazil alongside Jokic is a lot more effective than Valanciunas alongside Jokic. Right. Brazil has spacing out to the 3-point line. In theory, Valanciunas did too. And I know we're talking about Valanciunas as if he's gone. He's not officially gone yet. He's still under contract on this team. We're presuming he'll be gone. We'll get to that maybe in the next segment. But I mean, Brazil has spacing out to the 3-point line. You love the fact that he's an athlete. He's not like Valanciunas at all. And so you can really afford yourself a lot more effective double bigs lineup situations with that type of player on the court alongside Nikola Jokic in that type of situation. So for what that's worth, it's an interesting combination that they might mess around with. But yeah, all things considered, I think this is a solid pick. I think some general comps that this guy has been compared to, Trayvon, are Larry Nance Jr., Obi Toppin, those types of guys, right? Who are just freak athletes at the forward position. Maybe even like we saw with both of them, I think both Nance and Toppin were in a dunk contest at some point in time. Maybe Brazil becomes one of those guys, right? I think he'd be kind of fun to watch throw some dunks down representing the Nuggets in a dunk competition, especially with how bad the dunk contest has been over the last few years as well. So, I mean, there's another added potential benefit. But yeah, I'll agree with you. This pick is definitely in the B range somewhere. But for the value the Nuggets got, moving up to 35, getting 2 extra second round picks, good extra draft capital, I think that's a solid selection. As far as the second of the Nuggets second round picks, Bryce Hopkins is that guy. Another senior, another 23-year-old. He is 6'6". He went to St. John's, by the way, another pretty good college basketball team last season. He's 6'6", 219 pounds. He's got a 6'11" wingspan, so another larger wingspan for a guy who's a little bit shorter than his wingspan reach. 38.5-inch vertical. In 2026 in college, he averaged about 29 minutes per game, 14 points per game, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal per game, not really many blocks, 56% true shooting, and 36% from 3. Now, as far as his strengths, physicality is number one among his strengths. He's got a solid frame. He's got the ability to punish smaller defenders on drives. And so that's a nice little added benefit for getting Hopkins. His downhill ability as well is another strength of his. He has a solid face-up game we're seeing here. He's got some shot creation ability off the bounce, and he's got some pretty good burst. He also has solid feel, solid connective skills. He's a good rebounder for his position and his size, and he's a solid defender. The frame definitely helps with that. As far as his weaknesses, injury concerns, believe it or not, are actually close to the top of the weaknesses of his. He tore his ACL in 2024. Always have that in the back of your mind if you're a basketball fan and you're thinking about a guy that your team drafted out of college. Could that happen again? Obviously, it's a possibility. His shooting is also a weakness. He didn't really shoot a ton of threes, even though we said he shot, 36% from 3? He didn't really shoot a ton. And so, I mean, ultimately, his shooting is not a strength. He's not the type of guy that you're like, all right, this is a guy we can plug in and he'll be a solid 3-and-D player. Really not much emphasis on the 3 right now. Athleticism is also kind of a concern. He played forward in college, but if you remember his dimensions that I just read off, 6'6", 219, he really fits more at the wing at the NBA level. And for a guy who needs to develop his shot, I mean, currently it's a weakness. And as far as his versatility, that comes along with the fact that his athleticism is kind of questionable, along with his size and his shot. So as far as Hopkins is concerned, what do you think about his potential fit on this team? Not necessarily this season, but at some point in the next few seasons, as the Nuggets are trying to find cost-effective ways to compete.
Yeah, I see Hopkins as kind of a guy who's going to come in and spend some time in the G League to start. I think, not a great 3-point shooter, but there are signs. He made 12 of his final 16 threes at the end of the season last year. So what's that tell you? That the ability is there. It's maybe kind of streakiness at some point, but if that can be refined, and if he can be a guy that you can count on to knock down, 35% from the 3-point line or even better, I think then you've got something that you can play with, because the defensive piece, I think, is there. That's when you hear about somebody 6'6", but then, the wingspan of what he has, that's, to me, that just screams somebody who can play defense. This is a tough comparison. I am not putting him in the same category as Harper from the Spurs, as Dylan Harper, but that's kind of what I think the Nuggets would love to see him grow into, is kind of that Dylan Harper type of play style, where he's got the physicality to go in and be able to drive to the hoop, score with contact, get rebounds, and play a physical style of defense. Not comparing him to Dylan Harper. Dylan Harper, I think, is extremely, he's very good, one of the top rookies in the NBA. I don't think that Hopkins is that, but I think that's kind of the style that I think the Nuggets really hope that he can grow into. And that's, to me, I think that's a big compliment to give him, to say, hey, here's a guy who you can model after, and it would be Dylan Harper.
Yeah, and some of the comps he's actually gotten player-wise are Grant Williams and Cody Martin. Yep. So, I mean, maybe there's a reason the Nuggets didn't make that Grant Williams trade. They're like, we'll just find our Grant Williams in the second round. But yeah, there's definitely a lot to like about the potential, I think. And when you're thinking about a Nuggets coaching staff that is so good at helping guys develop offensively, I mean, the number one offensive rating in the league last year, you saw guys like Jalen Pickett take some pretty significant strides as far as their fit in the offense and their ability to shoot. I think a guy like Hopkins has a good opportunity to develop his skill set here and succeed and become a 3-and-D wing. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot that needs to change as far as his just general athleticism, getting stronger, especially if he's, and probably even faster too, right? He's going to have to pick up some speed if he's not going to play the forward and switch over to a more wing type of position. But if there's a team that could turn him into a guy who could succeed as a wing at the NBA level, I think our coaching staff is probably close to the top of that list, offensively at least. And the defense probably will just be a benefit for him as he continues to grow into his body at the NBA level. But yeah, I'll agree with you and say he probably plays most of the season in the G League, which is not something I think we'll say as much about a guy like Brazile. But I mean, Brazile might get his fair share of G League action too. It all depends on what the Nuggets want to do in free agency, and we'll use that as a nice little segue into our next segment here. So free agency officially begins next Tuesday, I believe. I mean, the legal tampering period begins a little bit before that, but deals can't officially be made until next week. So this weekend is when things will probably start to heat up. I mean, we've already seen some pretty interesting trades happen over the last week. I think we have to talk about those briefly, right? Because let's start with Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? There had been some rumors that he might be traded out west to a team like the Thunder. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Thankfully, he got sent in conference to the Miami Heat. But I think that's actually a pretty good fit for him, all things considered. They've got Bam now. They've got him. They had Norman Powell, for what that's worth. Andrew Wiggins. I mean, solid role players that can fit alongside him. 3-and-D kind of guys. What do you think about that trade to the Heat for Giannis Antetokounmpo, and I guess even the package that the Bucks got back?
I like it for both teams, to be honest with you. I think, look, anytime you can get a Giannis, that's a positive. Clearly, you're putting him, pairing him up with Bam, who, look, I'm not going to say he's, going to go down in the lores of history as one of the greatest scorers, but he does have an 80-point game under his belt. I think he's got the second highest scoring game in history. I think that was maybe a little bit of a fluke, but look, you pair those two together, and I think kind of like this is Pat Riley making his last stand and really kind of saying, hey, here I got the two guys, we're going to fill everything else in, because they do still need to do that. They need to fill in. They're not very deep right now. They traded a lot of depth away, and for Milwaukee, look, Milwaukee kind of needed a reset. Right. So I think they got a lot of talent coming back to them. I know Tyler Hero is from Wisconsin, not far from Milwaukee. So, maybe not everybody in the league would be super stoked about heading to Milwaukee, but it sounded like Hero was like on board with it. Like that's the place he really wanted to go and really wants to play in front of his, his family and his hometown crowd. So I think those are big positives for the Bucks. Obviously, you also got a lot of draft capital out of that deal. And then, I think the Bucks had a decent draft as well. So you kind of start to pair that all together. And, look, it always is a bummer. I'm sure we'll have this conversation when or if the Nuggets ever make a trade with one of their main guys, Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon. I mean, we talked about it, last year when they dealt MPJ. What those feelings are. It sucks to lose those guys who were kind of the franchise guy. And that's what Giannis definitely was in Milwaukee. So I get it from the Bucks fan standpoint, that one hurts. But you can't be that mad with the return that you got.
Yeah, for sure. It feels like the Bucks have now committed to a full rebuild, which is good for them. Because I mean, to just be hanging in limbo the last few seasons with the whole Giannis trade rumors hanging over your head, and the fact that you've tried to put some competitive pieces around him and it just hasn't worked out. It's good for them that they're now just committing to a direction. And so I've even heard rumors that they might try to move off of a guy like Hero, who they just acquired. So that part of that trade might not even be fully settled yet. They might not even get to see Hero in a Bucks uniform. But I mean, we'll see how that pans out for them. But good for the Heat, man. The Heat have always found ways to just be competitive during the season and sneak into the playoffs. And so to now have another superstar to go alongside Bam Adebayo, now the Heat kind of feel like they're in a solid position. They feel like they can get over the hump. I mean, they were the team that played us in the finals just 3 or so years ago. So that was not even a finals they were supposed to make. But now they have a superstar and they feel like they can legitimately compete in the Eastern Conference, which overall is generally weaker than the Western Conference, right? So very interesting to see how that goes down. They'll have some competition. Obviously, the Knicks are not going anywhere. It feels like all those guys are in their prime pretty much on that Knicks team. You have Jason Tatum coming back fully from injury this season. You have Tyrese Halliburton coming back too, and a rebuilt Pacers team. And you still have the Mitchell Harden duo now in Cleveland. We get to see what we assume will be a full season of both of them. So maybe the East will be a little bit more competitive. But I think obviously with Giannis now on the Heat have a much better chance to succeed, obviously, in the Eastern Conference. How about this trade, though? This is the trade we need to talk more about because this significantly impacts the Nuggets, I think. LaMelo Ball to the Timberwolves. Hello. That was kind of a surprise, man. I don't think. Did you expect that to happen? I did not expect that to happen.
I didn't see him. I didn't see that when I went to bed that night. I did not think I would wake up and see LaMelo Ball on the Timberwolves. Look, the Timberwolves, I think, have made a couple of moves. They've gotten rid of 2 of their bigs now. So it seems like they're kind of, and who knows, they might not be done too, because there's rumors out there floating around that they're still, in the hunt for Jaylen Brown. But look, at this point right now, you've got the ability to have somebody who, LaMelo Ball's, I'm going to say it probably top 3, top 5 point guard from a handles standpoint. I think he's never really played alongside of a superstar like Ant. So we'll see how that kind of works, because I do feel like there's only one ball, and both of those guys are pretty ball dominant. I think Ant is probably going to have to adjust a little bit, being able to play off the ball. I think he can do it. But when it comes down to crunch time, is Ant going to, be able to defer and give the ball up to LaMelo to bring the ball up and be the main guy handling the ball? That's to be seen. But overall, look, I do think that it makes Minnesota better. It makes them a more dangerous team. If you're asking me, the thing that really kind of bogged down Minnesota in the playoffs last year was the fact that you could just double Ant and really make it difficult, because there wasn't anybody else, outside of the Terrence Shannons of the world, this was his kind of first year bringing the ball up. But you had, obviously DeSumo, he got injured. You had Bones Highland bringing the ball up. You had Mike Conley Jr. bringing the ball up. Those guys weren't drawing a ton of defense. So you could double Ant and say, hey, we're going to make the other guys beat you. Well, I don't think you can now just as easily do that. And so I think that they might have lost a little bit on their depth, and obviously they've lost a lot on their size. But I do think that this has made them a better team.
Yeah, we'll have to see how this all plays out. On paper, it looks like the Minnesota Timberwolves have arguably the best backcourt now in the NBA, and they re-signed Ayo Dosunmu as well for depth. So on paper, that's what it looks like. Now, LaMelo has played a very, very poor amount of games in his first few seasons in the NBA. So health is obviously a concern for the Minnesota Timberwolves in this type of deal. But I mean, like you also kind of said, they shipped away Naz Reid in this deal to Charlotte. That's just a few days after shipping out Julius Randle to the Nets. So this team is now fully committing to being a more athletic, shooting-oriented team rather than a team that sort of bullies people in the paint. Now, I know Naz was a more stretched type of 4, but I mean, Julius Randle, that's an all-star caliber player, right? 27 points per game in the regular season. This is a very, very significant shift in play style for Minnesota. Now, I honestly, you might remember just a few weeks ago when they played the Spurs in the second round after beating us, I thought they might actually have a chance to upset the Spurs in that series because they had so many bigs. They were, for whatever reason, just not able to make it happen. Didn't help that they were dealing with significant injuries, like to Dante DiVincenzo, who, by the way, is still on that team, just reinforcing the fact that they have a very deep guard core. But it's very interesting that they've decided to shift away from that. But it will help the Nuggets a lot to know that now they don't have to play a Minnesota Timberwolves team that is fully geared up to defeat them in a playoff series. Obviously, Rudy Gobert is still there. But if you're the Nuggets, right, I mean, I think the Nuggets, in theory, have the ability to manage this version of the Timberwolves better than the previous version. The Nuggets just did not have the personnel to be able to stop the Timberwolves last season. But with Randle and Reid now gone, it definitely gives us a better ability to maneuver that. LaMelo definitely gives them a significant shooting upgrade for sure. But I mean, we'll just have to see how that all shakes out. I'm not sure how good he is defensively. I haven't really dug into that a ton. But yeah, that was a very surprising trade. I did not expect that to happen. I thought, especially given that Charlotte kind of came on the scene out of nowhere towards the end of last season and made the play-in, that they were kind of just going to keep that core together with Ball and Kneppel and Brandon Miller. They were like, nope, actually it's Khan's team now, and we're going to draft Christian Anderson, and we're going to draft Hannes Steinbach to go along with all these other young guys, and we're really just going to lock in now with this core. Very interesting course of action on both ends. So very surprising trade. But I use that kind of as a segue into the Nuggets free agency discussion that we're gonna kick off now, because maybe size, I hesitate to say maybe it's less of a priority now in free agency because the fact that the Spurs picked up who they picked up in the draft. They picked up size in the draft. So now the Nuggets aren't struggling as much with multiple different teams that have size to combat Nikola Jokic and company. It's more so that the teams in the top of the Western Conference have that size, right? The Thunder with Mara and Hartenstein, presuming he doesn't get traded. Chet on the Thunder, and now the Spurs with Wembanyama, Quaintance, and Reed. So the Nuggets definitely will need size, and they'll have to address their center position. They're going to have to find some depth there. But now this is the way I kind of wanted to walk through this segment. Looking at the same Nuggets account I mentioned earlier, go follow them again, Nuggets country _. They've been doing these little mock off seasons throughout the off season so far. And so I kind of want to walk through some of these free agent signings and just kind of discuss what we think makes sense here, what we think might not. There are a few of them. So this will probably be a little bit more of a quick kind of evaluation perspective sort of deal as we march through them. But let's take a look at some of these. So in the first mock off season that they did, the situation here would be Jalen Pickett gets his team option exercised. Okay. He has a team option for the upcoming season. In this scenario, we're exercising that. We're going to waive and stretch Jonas Valanciunas. We're going to extend Nikola Jokic. We're going to extend Peyton Watson for 4 years, $95 million. And we're going to extend Spencer Jones for 3 years, $15 million, while re-signing Bruce Brown to a 1 year, $3.5 million contract, picking up Kevon Looney in free agency for a 1 year, $3.9 million contract, and picking up Jordan McLaughlin, guard, who's been around the league the last few years, for a 1 year, $3.2 million contract. And that is the first situation we're dealing with here. What are your thoughts on this particular offseason situation for the Denver Nuggets?
I like it, except for two pieces. I would prefer to probably let Pickett walk. I just don't see him. I just don't see him as being the guy that we need to help us push us over the edge, or push us through, to the playoffs. And then the second piece that I'm not a huge fan of is Bruce Brown. And I know that hurts a lot of ears for the Nugget faithful, but Bruce Brown's not the Bruce Brown that we had on the championship Nuggets team. Look, I guess he can come in and he can still give you minutes and energy, but that's what he's going to give you is minutes and energy. He's not going to be a guy who's out there, averaging 10 points a night. He's not going to be a guy that is going to be an instrumental piece. I think there are better options out there. And so the other parts to that, the extending Peyton Watson, extending Jokic, offering Spencer Jones, those, to me, I think those are three critical things that do need to happen. I like that dollar amount for Peyton Watson. I think that's kind of right in the area that he needs to be. Hopefully he agrees with that, because, it wasn't so long ago that, somebody on this team got a heck of a lot more than that. And I think that he's been the better player of those two. So we'll see. But if there are other options, I'd like to hear the other options. I would say that that's not my favorite.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm kind of right there with you. I would also personally like to let Pickett walk this offseason. Obviously, we're waiving and stretching Jonas Valanciunas. That's just not a question. I wouldn't be surprised if that's present in every one of these mock drafts or mock off seasons. So that's not a surprise. Extending Jokic, that's fine. Peyton Watson at a 23.75 AAV. That is really team friendly. I think I heard some news a day or so ago that the Nuggets are prepared to offer him upwards of $30 million a year AAV just to keep him in-house, which could push this contract up to 4 years, 120 at a bare minimum. But if you could get him on this kind of deal, hey, look, that's something you will take all day, every day. Hands down. 3 years, $15 million for Spencer Jones also feels just about right. Maybe something like 2 years for 8 or 9 is something you could try to squeeze out of him too. much more team friendly if you're trying to save money. But I don't really have an issue with that particular contract. I'm going to agree with you also. Bruce Brown should not be back on this team. He did not provide enough offensively or really defensively, honestly, to be able to justify paying him $3.5 million. I mean, you could probably go out in the free agency market and spend that money better elsewhere, or just save it and use that as some sort of free space in a trade situation. As far as Kevon Looney, I wouldn't have an issue with bringing in Kevon Looney to be your second or third string center. I think Deron Holmes will obviously compete for that spot too, but it's just nice to have a veteran who has playoff experience on your team. You know, DeAndre Jordan kind of filled that type of role the last few seasons, so don't have an issue with that. Jordan McLaughlin, I guess for guard depth, fine. But if you're going to go get Jordan McLaughlin, you might as well just re-sign Tyus Jones, right? A guy who's been in your system more and has theoretically a better reputation in the NBA. So I'm not really a fan of that signing particularly. But noted in that situation, there is no Christian Brown trade. And so this is the Nuggets spending an awful lot of money to not only keep the core starting unit together, but also re-sign Peyton Watson and Spencer Jones while giving Nikola Jokic a contract extension. Very interesting stuff for sure. Here's the second mock off season we have here. In this situation, we're picking up Jalen Pickett's team option again, but there's a trade here. All right. So the first trade that we see in this mock off season is us sending Cam Johnson, a second-round pick, 2 second-round picks, actually, to the Clippers in exchange for Derrick Jones Jr., Chris Dunn, Isaiah Jackson, and Jalen Smith in a 3-team trade that involves the Bulls. And the Bulls in this situation get Zeke Naji, Jonas Valanciunas, and a first-round pick from the Nuggets. That would have been our 26th overall pick. So I guess this mock-off season doesn't really make as much sense now. But assuming the players involved were possible to acquire, what do you think of that particular trade before we get to well, I guess we don't even really have to touch on those. It's the same re-signings and then just a signing of Jevon Carter for a year, $3.5 million. David Roddy a year, 2.5. What do you think of that trade though? That trade is the more interesting thing that I want to pick your mind on.
Yeah, so I like the trade. I like the names in the trade. I think there would be one name that I would he may be a free agent, so I don't know that they would put him in the trade because I don't think they would do a sign and trade with him. But if we're talking Clippers, look, Bogdan Bogdanović we know he can play alongside of Joker. At some point in time, we've got to start doing something that isn't what everybody thinks we're going to do. Again, Pickett, whatever, they can sign, or I would prefer we move away from Pickett, regardless of what the scenario is. But I think if you can add a Bogdanović type of guy, and then look, you look at his numbers over the last couple of years, they haven't jumped off the page. But what you're doing is more of a locker room, a chemistry type of move to where you're making your big guy satisfied. You're also putting alongside of him a guy that has played with him, so he knows where he needs to get to on the court. And who knows, maybe that can be a piece. You know, you start to hit open shots and things start to happen, and then Bogdanović is the guy who he was 2 or 3 years ago. I don't want to count on that after I just said, look, Bruce Brown's not that guy he was 3 years ago. But to me, if we're just talking that deal with the Clippers, I don't know which name I would move out, but I think that's a name I would try to move in if we're looking at the Clipper doing a deal with the Clippers. Additionally, if we're also talking Clippers, you know, I think it would definitely take a little bit more than you know, Cam, Christian Brown, and something else, but probably more like a Jamal Murray than a Christian Brown. But you know, there's rumors out there that Kawhi could be somebody who the Clippers are looking to move. I think you would definitely want to make sure you have some security with Kawhi signing an extension past this year, because I think this is the last year on his contract. But you know, again, if we're having conversations with the Clippers, let's have the conversations with the Clippers.
Yeah, and I've got a very interesting Kawhi trade that I came across the other day for us to discuss a little bit later on. So definitely keep that in your back pocket. But as far as this particular trade, I mean, Chris Dunn doesn't really jump off the page to you significantly, but this is probably just to make the money work. I mean, probably something similar with Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith. That adds the Nuggets some solid wing depth and big depth, which is something obviously that we've talked about extensively as them needing. Derrick Jones Jr. obviously is the highlight of this trade, though, and for good reason. 2025, 2026, 50% from the field, 36% from three. With a 113, 114 defensive rating doesn't necessarily jump off the page at you, kind of right around average, but a 118 offensive rating is not bad. And I mean, you look at the skill set he brings, solid wing, small forward type of player that would fit nicely in this system. All right. 3-and-D style of player, even if the defense is more so on the average end. That's a deal I think that would be solid for the Nuggets to make. Would the Bulls really take Zeke Naji and Jonas Valanciunas, though? I highly doubt that you'd be able to convince them to take both. Jonas wants to go play in Europe, so there's really no advantage for him or really incentive for him to want to stick in the NBA on the Chicago Bulls of all teams. And the Nuggets tried to move off of Zeke Naji with the Bulls, I think, last season around the trade deadline, and that never really materialized. So this doesn't really feel realistic. But if this was realistic, I wouldn't really have an issue with it. Yeah, you move off of Cam Johnson as well. So for what that's worth, is what it is. Solid overall trade. As far as the free agent signings, I mean, Javon Carter, that's fine for a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. Guard depth, clearly something the Nuggets need. Decent three-point shooter, too. I mean, 36% from three. Resigning David Roddy, not a bad idea, honestly. Again, the Nuggets need depth at the forward spot. He played all right in the minimal opportunities he had at the end of last season. So, again, a guy with familiarity, you might as well just try to bring him back. So, not a bad mock-off season there. Here's the third one. I'm just going to skip past Pickett again. I'm going to skip past Valanciunas again. I'm going to skip past the extensions again. In this mock-off season, we have another trade involving Cam Johnson. This trade involves Cam Johnson going to the Boston Celtics, the Nuggets getting Sam Hauser, and in this 3-team trade with the Grizzlies get Zeke Naji and 2 second-round picks, one from Boston and one from Denver. Sam Hauser, would you have an issue with this trade if you're the Nuggets getting Sam Hauser in exchange for Cam Johnson?
I like that deal. I don't know that the Celtics, I don't know what their plans are right now with this offseason. I do like Hauser. I think he is a guy who can, kind of fill a need for the Nuggets. The one thing that scared me with the Nuggets, the press conference that they had when Josh Kroenke was talking, and he mentioned that, he threw out there kind of, it was almost jokingly, but sometimes there's a lot of, honesty in joking, when he said, well, who knows, we may just run it back. And I think, for a lot of Nuggets fans, it was kind of just like one of those moments where it's like, man, what's the definition of insanity? Is just to try to do the same thing over and over and over and expect a different result. I think we're in that with the Nuggets. We've tried the same thing a couple of years in a row. I know Cam Johnson was a new name, so it's not the exact same thing over and over. But that, I feel like this core, we've been there and we tried to do that. We shook it up a little bit with Michael Porter Jr. leaving and bringing in Cam. But I think it's bigger than that. Look, the Nuggets didn't make it out of the first round. There needs to be more, and I get it that there were injuries in play and things like that, but to me, that was a clear sign of these other teams have progressed and the Nuggets haven't moved with them. You can't just blame everything on injury. The other teams had injuries too. The T-Wolves were dealing with a lot of injuries, and we couldn't beat them. So you can't just blame it on injuries. You do have to do some things that can mix it up. And I think that might be a trade that, could add a piece to the Nuggets that might bear some fruit.
Yeah, it's very possible. I'm looking at Hauser's numbers here: 42% from the field, 39% from three. Okay, so he fits the Nuggets scheme in that regard. I mean, 4 rebounds a game, 111 defensive rating. That's pretty solid for a guy who's 6'7", 217. So I wouldn't really have an issue with that trade either. Again, it's definitely a cost-saving move, right? Much cheaper to have Sam Hauser than Cam Johnson. I think another interesting part of this 3-team trade is that you move off of Zeke Nnaji magically. Look, if there's a Zeke Nnaji trade that the Nuggets can make this offseason, I think that in and of itself would be a win. Just to get him some new scenery and to get that $8 million a year or whatever it is off the books, even though he only has like 2 years left. It's just money that cannot be wasted at this point in time. So I don't really have an issue with that trade either. As far as the free agent signings that are made in this mock off season, we re-signed Tim Hardaway Jr. to a 2-year, $12.5 million deal. We re-signed Bruce Brown to a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. And we signed Dwight Powell to a 1-year, $3.9 million deal for depth. Obviously, we've talked about Brown already. We'll save ourselves some time there. What do you think about re-signing THJ and signing Dwight Powell for center depth?
Okay, so I would love it if we figured out a way to bring back Tim Hardaway Jr. I don't know that they're going to be able to, just especially if they bring back Bruce Brown. I don't really see that. Dwight Powell, that's kind of an interesting one. Obviously, he's going to be your backup big. He's not going to provide you with a ton of, he's going to go out there and play maybe 15, 20 minutes a game max. That's what he's going to give you. But, historically, it looks like last year he played 63 games, 55 the year before, 63 the year before. So he's somewhere around that, 60, 70 game mark. So relatively healthy, it seems. I don't see any, maybe 1 year back in 2019 and 2020 where he only played 40 games. So there must have been an injury there. But he seems to be that kind of guy who's going to give somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes, minimal points. So he's just a big body. He can go in there, get rebounds. He doesn't really shoot the three exceptionally well. So he's not going to be somebody who stretches the floor. But I think that's, at that kind of dollar number, that's probably the type of player you're going to get. I would love it to be able to, going back to Tim Hardaway Jr., I just don't see a world where Hardaway Jr. and Bruce Brown both are on this team next year. Me personally, I would be okay with moving away from Bruce Brown. If we're going to talk about retreads and bring back guys, from years past, let's circle back with Russell Westbrook. I liked his energy much better. I think he actually played the game, sure, he made his blunders. Don't get me wrong. There were times where we all kind of smacked ourselves on the forehead and said, what is he doing? But the effort that he gives, the energy he plays with, he still has, the ability to kind of go out there and put up good games. He can fill in a backup role if needed. So that's just a guy to me who is much more beneficial than a Bruce Brown, just in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. If it was between Bruce Brown or Russell Westbrook, I would absolutely pick Russell Westbrook. That's not even a question. Would he want to come back here after we let him go in kind of the disappointing fashion that we did? I don't know. He's also now 2 years older than he was the last time he played here. So yeah, that would be very interesting for the Nuggets to do something like that. But I guess that's probably not terribly likely. Very interesting, though. Very interesting and definitely worth consideration. In another mock off season here, again, skipping through the moves that we've already kind of talked about that generally show up in all these mock off seasons. In this particular one, we see this trade with the Charlotte Hornets. All right. In this particular trade, the Nuggets get Miles Bridges, Ryan Kalkbrenner, well, this one involved our first round pick as well. A 2027 Boston second round pick and a 2030 Utah second round pick in exchange for Aaron Gordon. And I mean, again, this was pre-draft, so this was kind of swapping those first round picks again. But look at the players here. What do you think about this player swap? Miles Bridges and Ryan Kalkbrenner come to Denver. Aaron Gordon goes to Charlotte. I'm not a huge fan of this personally, but what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know much about Ryan Kalkbrenner. Miles Bridges is, to me, obviously the guy, the centerpiece of that deal, along with Aaron Gordon. Miles Bridges reminds me a lot of a younger Aaron Gordon, not from an athletic standpoint, but their physical style of play. But look, he's another guy. He looks pretty, on paper, he's a 31, 35, somewhere in there, minute per night type of guy. He's probably going to go out there and get you somewhere around, 17 to 20 points on about 45 to 50% shooting. He shoots the three at about a 33% clip. So, those are guys that we have had. You could probably add a little bit when you pair him with Jokic. I think Jokic is that good. He's just able to bump guys scoring up, to bump up their 3-point percentage. So who knows? He might be a little bit better of a fit. But to me, if I'm choosing between Aaron Gordon or Miles Bridges, because I would have to double check on what his contract status is. But I would prefer Aaron Gordon. So Bridges is on a 3-year, $75 million deal. So he's making about $22 million a year, $23 million a year. I think Gordon's at 24. So all things considered, I don't know that there's a ton of savings there. So I would prefer to maybe, go with Aaron Gordon, because I know how he fits with Jokic. I don't really know how Bridges is going to fit on this team.
Yeah, I think the benefit of this trade would have definitely been experienced pre-draft, because the Nuggets pick up 3 picks here. That gives them some flexibility going forward with other trades. But after the fact, yeah, this doesn't really seem like a great trade for Denver. Obviously, Miles Bridges has been healthier the last few seasons. He's not as good of a shooter overall, and he's a worse defender. So if anything, it's probably worse for the Nuggets to make this move. Ryan Kalkbrenner is a young center. Not a shooter at all. Slightly better than average defender, which is not bad for a guy who's entering his second season. But again, that, even though it gives the Nuggets center depth, I don't really think that that's worth trading Aaron Gordon for, all things considered. Another trade in this mock-off season involved a straight-up Cam Johnson for Grayson Allen trade, involving a 2026 second-round pick, again, pre-draft. But if you were to make that swap, Grayson Allen for Cam Johnson, is that a swap you would make?
I would have told you a year ago, absolutely not. Now, knowing what I know about Cam, I don't hate that trade.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Grayson is a few inches shorter, probably going to give you less on the defensive end, but as far as shooting is concerned, an absolute knockdown shooter. So you could definitely see him fitting into this Nuggets offense really well. I think I even thought that multiple times when I was watching us play the Suns last year. I was like, dang, if only we had Grayson Allen on our team. But yeah, I think right now I would rather have Cam than Grayson, just all things considered. I also don't think that's a trade that the Suns would make, straight up. So very interesting stuff. Okay. This is the last one I think we'll talk about before we talk about 2 very interesting trades that I came across the other day that I want your opinion on. In this particular mock-off season, the trade that's central here is the Nuggets sending Cam Johnson to the Pistons in exchange for Karis LeVert. There were first-round picks swapped in this particular draft too. What do you think of that particular trade?
I would sign up for that. Look, I'm a big Karis LeVert fan. I like watching him play. Looks like what his deal is currently 2-year, $28 million. So, yeah, I think I would sign up for that, to be honest with you. He gives you some of that, some of the more of the 3-point, the 3-and-D type of ability. But man, that's an interesting trade. I don't know that Detroit would be willing to do that. That one's interesting to me. I like Caris LeVert a lot, though.
Yeah, yeah. You like the player. What did you say his contract was again, Caris LeVert?
It was 2 years. Oops. It was 2 years. I think 28 million.
Oh, okay. So it's like $9 million cheaper with an extra year worth of commitment. Caris LeVert is a little bit smaller than Cam Johnson, though. So I mean, just for $9 million saved, is that, unless that turns into like re-signing Tim Hardaway or something like that, I just don't really see the value in losing a 3 just for the sake of saving that cash. Does that make sense? Like, even if you re-sign Spencer Jones, you're not re-signing Spencer Jones to be your starting small forward. And Caris LeVert can't be your starting small forward. So you'd have to shift Christian Braun over to the 3, which quite honestly fits his play style a lot better. But I mean, Christian is undersized to play 3 in the NBA. So this just doesn't feel like a trade that provides the Nuggets with the rotational needs that they currently require. So I don't think I'm a huge fan of that trade either. Again, Caris LeVert, solid player, but not really.
I agree. As I'm looking at his year-over-year stats, I think the other thing with Caris LeVert is there's a pretty decent injury history there that I think you have to also keep in the back of your mind, where Cam, I don't think, carries as much of that injury history with him.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, it's what it is with that particular trade. But with that said, as we kind of get to the end of our episode here today, I did want to talk about these 2 trades that I came across the other day that would be very, very interesting. Should the Nuggets potentially inquire into any of them. The first is related to a guy you mentioned earlier on this episode, Kawhi Leonard. I said stick it in your pocket, that trade idea to discuss right now. Here's the particular trade that this particular site on sportsnaut.com had the Nuggets potentially considering if they were to try to acquire Kawhi Leonard, which is an assumption by itself. But this particular trade would involve Aaron Gordon, Christian Braun, and a few picks to get Kawhi Leonard. Now, I'm sure the Clippers might want at least a first-round pick. I'm not sure if us sending them how many second-round picks do we have? Just the 2, or do we have a third one that we could send them?
I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head, but I don't think we have a ton. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. We do not have a ton of controllable picks to send. Maybe I think I saw that we might have a 2031 first-round pick swap. But, I mean, Aaron Gordon, Christian Braun, 2 second-round picks, and a 2031 first-round pick swap for Kawhi Leonard. Assuming that's possible, I'm not sure that's something the Clippers would do. I think there's a good reason that they should do it, right? I mean, you get a solid, still young, up-and-coming 3-and-D in theory wing in Christian Braun, and you get Aaron Gordon, who's been one of the better forwards in the league, in exchange for an aging Kawhi Leonard. There's reasons why you could see the Clippers being interested in this deal. Is this a deal that you think the Nuggets should be interested in making?
I think you kick the can on it. I don't know that you actually do it, though. And here's my reasoning why. So, again, it's hard to, when we've reached this point in the offseason, it's hard to know what is truth and what is fiction. But I've seen reports that say Kawhi really isn't interested in re-signing any sort of extension with anybody except for 2 teams. That would be the Spurs and the Raptors, the 2 teams who he's played for in the past. If that's true, and if that is the case, then if I'm the Nuggets, there's no way I'm trading Aaron Gordon and Christian Braun and potential other draft picks or anything else to get a guy who is essentially going to come over for 1 year, and then I know you're off those salaries, but then you're back in that boat of, okay, now who do we have to go out and try and find to fill this role next to Joker with Jamal. So to me, I think you listen. It never hurts to listen. I think you may try to maneuver some different pieces, maybe even bring in a third team that can help maybe fill in some other pieces for you, or make it so you don't have to give up those trade assets, those draft assets. But look, I don't want to take anything away from Kawhi. I think Kawhi is probably the best player in that trade package, without question. But that's a lot for the Nuggets to give up for a guy who you would get for one run. And if that's the case, I don't think I would do it just to give it up for one shot.
Yeah, I mean, a trio of Murray, Leonard, and Jokic would be absolutely insane for 1 year. But that's exactly the issue that you brought up, is that it very likely could only be for 1 year. And that just puts you in quite the troubling situation for the next few. Because let's be very clear, the Nuggets are not thinking about this season as a season where it's make or break. They have the next 3 to 5 seasons to really lock down and compete in the Nikola Jokic prime. That said, I mean, they've talked about it already. They're trying to balance win now with being able to be decently competitive in the near future after the competitive window, after the prime of Nikola Jokic. So they're balancing priorities here. I think obviously they should sell out for the more win now narrative, but I mean, we'll see how they balance that, again, with the financial restrictions they have. That said, Kawhi Leonard, I mean, in this particular situation, to give up Aaron Gordon, who obviously the largest knock on is his availability. Same type of thing with Christian Brown. With Christian, it's more performance also. For a guy who's in his mid-30s and Kawhi Leonard, even though he's played well recently and has been on the court recently, has had injury issues in the last few seasons, there's just a lot of uncertainty here that really kind of makes me hesitant to pull the trigger on that particular deal. And so as far as the Kawhi Leonard trade, I don't think I would be a huge fan of that. Now, a trade that I'd be very interested in is this second one that I wanted us to talk about. This involves the Nuggets sending that first round pick swap, Cameron Johnson and Christian Brown, to the Houston Rockets for Kevin Durant. Oh, very interesting. Very, very interesting. What do you think about that particular move?
So that one gets me thinking. I would be extremely intrigued to see Kevin Durant, Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, and Aaron Gordon on the court at the same time. I think the Nuggets could win a lot of games if those guys are healthy and are able to stay on the court. I would have to really think that one through. I don't know what it does from what's KD's contract? Do you know by chance?
It's pretty expensive. It's a max contract. I think I want to say it's like he's on a $90 million extension with Houston. Yeah. It has a player option for 2027, 2028, and he turns 38 before the start of next season.
Yeah, so look, I will say the one thing, age doesn't concern me with Kevin Durant. And here's why. I know he had the Achilles injury when he played with Golden State. But outside of that, I don't recall really any devastating type of injuries that Kevin Durant has gotten throughout his career. He is a first ballot Hall of Fame, without question, top 15 player of all time. Depending on where you put him, but the guy can absolutely still take over games and win you games from shooting the ball. His defense is whatever. I don't think he's out there as a primary defensive stopper. But what does he have? He is super lengthy. I know it's just kind of like Joker in that standpoint. He gets his hands and feet into the passing lanes, makes things difficult. Even on closeouts where he's got his hands up running at you, he's still a 7-foot tall guy with a pretty decent wingspan, so he's going to affect shots. Yeah, look. The other piece of it to me is the fact that you're able to get out of the Christian Braun contract. I think that contract alone is kind of the lead weight for this Nuggets team. And the other part that I didn't even really think about until I just started talking about Christian Braun is you now have the ability to pair Kevin Durant with Peyton Watson as well. I think I told this story, but this was when Peyton Watson first got drafted, and they were, back in Los Angeles, just kind of doing runs at the local gym, and Kevin Durant was the guy who said, "Hey, watch out for this kid, Peyton Watson. He's going to be a stud." If we could live in the life where we are now able to pair those two together and watch them play together, I think I'd sign up for that trade.
100%. I think there's a lot to like about this particular trade package. You move off of the two role players who you're trying to move off of, who have been the most inconsistent of the role players that you have. Forget Aaron Gordon in that regard. He's been really good when he's been on the court. And so, I mean, to be able to get rid of Brown and Johnson and their contracts and their relative inconsistency the last season or so, and bring in one of the best players of all time, who even at age 37 is putting up over 25 points per game and playing over 70 games a season. To put him alongside of a guy like Peyton Watson at the two, who he has a pretty solid relationship and respect for, there's just a lot to like about this. I mean, Murray, Watson, Durant, Gordon, Jokic starting five should win the NBA championship that season if they're healthy. Hands down, I think. I think they get through the Spurs and the Thunder with that lineup. It would just be such a great lineup to see. Now, you'd obviously lose a lot on the bench side. Your depth would be a lot less. You'd have to probably rely more on someone that you pick up in free agency, maybe even a guy like Trayvon Brazil more, because you're just not going to be able to pay very much depth with this particular situation. But I think as far as that starting lineup is concerned, that is easily a top 5 starting lineup in the NBA. That's not even questionable. That would be one of the greatest offensive units to ever see a basketball court during the course of a season in NBA history. And for that reason alone, I think it's worth exploring, because then at that point you enter into 2028, right? And I mean, Durant has, did I say a team option or is that a player option? He has a player option. So if he wanted to stay for another season, he could, right? And so this is kind of a multi-year commitment that you have with one of the best players of all time, even at age 38, 39 at that point, probably. I think that's worth it, right? And then after that season, you can kind of figure it out from there at the 2, at the 3. Maybe at that point, you find a way to get in some sort of situation where you can make that happen. Maybe a guy like Bryce Hopkins ends up panning out, and he gets plugged into the 3. You never know. But that's 2 years down the line. As far as competing right now, that's a great move. I love everything about this move. If I could make this trade and all parties involved were on board with that trade, I think that would be the trade of the offseason for the Nuggets. If they did that, I'd be like, all right, you've succeeded. You've done enough here. Not practically, because you still have to fill out your rotation, but to satisfy me as a fan, knowing that you're still focused on winning now, right? And that is the priority. So I would love that trade for sure. I think to close out this episode, I'm kind of curious about this. If we were to just take a very conservative approach to the Nuggets this offseason, what would you like the 15-man roster to look like? Just think of a few names that come to mind. It could be guys who played on the team last year. It could be some guys the Nuggets have been connected to reasonably. What would you like the starting 5, the backup 5, and just the tentative third string of this team to look like in 2026, 2027?
I mean, I think, obviously you're going to have Joker. I'm just going to go down the line of who I would like to still be on this team. You got Joker, you got Aaron Gordon, you hopefully can re-sign Peyton Watson. At the moment we have Christian Braun. At the moment we have Cam Johnson. Who's to say what will happen there? I do really like David Roddy. I do think him having more minutes and more opportunity. I like the way he plays. It's the effort, and a lot of times when guys like that are given consistent minutes, they tend to make the most of it. So I'd really like to see him, catch on with the team, hopefully the Nuggets, and see what he's able to do. I mentioned earlier Bogdan Bogdanovic. I think that's somebody who I would really like to see. You're going to have to find a backup guard. I talked earlier a little bit about Russell Westbrook. I mean, I know the way he left here wasn't the greatest, but even as recently as this week, I saw Peyton Watson posting pictures with, Peyton, Aaron Gordon, and Russell together. So they're still friends on the team. They're still allies on the team that, I think he would still be a piece that could fit. I would really like to see that. I do think that our rookie will probably, Brazil will probably get some playing time with the team. I didn't even talk about Holmes. I think Holmes is going to be a guy who they give a shot to, rightfully so, with what we talked about a couple episodes ago with his shooting percentage. I'd like to see a little bit more of that and see what that can come of. I do think, when you start to kind of fill in, some of those backup spots in the third level, I don't know if it's, a Tyus Jones. I don't know if it's, whoever they might be looking at from a guard perspective. But let's be honest, I don't think those are guys that come in and really dramatically change the face of the franchise. You didn't see Jones really get much playing time at all in the regular season. He played sparingly. I guess maybe he played a couple of big minutes in the postseason, but I think at this point, it's kind of like the analogy I used with Pat Riley and the Heat. Let's try, let's see what we can do. We know we got Jokic, we know we got Jamal, and right now we've got Aaron Gordon. Those are the three big pieces to me. And if we can, figure out a way to, I love the KD move, but if we can figure out a way to kind of get off of that Christian Brown contract, Cam Johnson should be a very movable contract, essentially it's an expiring contract. And try to find another piece that can come in here. And it's probably going to need to be a big name, like a Kevin Durant. I don't think Jaylen Brown's probably going to be the guy. My fingers are crossed, though, that he does not end up in Minnesota. I don't want to see him there because I think that would create another juggernaut in the West. But it's going to be something like that. I think that for me as a fan, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Is I would love to keep the three main guys together, the Jamal, Aaron Gordon, and Jokic, and build from there. I think that's kind of the core. I do think critical to sign Peyton Watson. I don't think, and from all accounts, it does sound like the front office is taking that seriously. But I think earlier you had mentioned, if we could get him at that 95 million mark, that's probably wishful thinking. I think you're right. It's probably going to be closer to that 120 mark where it's like 30 a year. But hey, to make that happen, that means that the Nuggets front office is going to have to spend some money in a luxury tax situation. And we've just seen in years past, they don't really like to do that. But hopefully they understand that, look, NBA championship windows aren't open forever. And they have a window, and it's probably closing as we speak, but you've still got the best player on the planet. And anytime you've got the best player on the planet, you've got a chance. And I think they have to take full advantage of that while they still have him, while he's still in his prime.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. I agree with that perspective. If I were to pretty much just pull on guys that have played for this team recently, combined with the picks we just made during the draft this last week, I think the bare minimum that I would be okay with would be a situation where they find a way to move off with Christian Braun, and that's the only guy they find a way to move off of. They don't even necessarily have to get players back, although I'm sure getting players back would probably be a part of that trade unless they sent him to a team that has an infinite amount of cap space. But assuming they get rid of him, I'm not going to speculate on who they get back in that trade. This is the lineup that I think I would be generally, at a very bare minimum, like okay with fundamentally. I think Jamal, Peyton, Watson, Cam Johnson, Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic, that's your starting five. I think it has to be. That's a very solid starting five, by the way. I think that's a competitive starting five that can compete against the Spurs and the Thunder. As far as the bench is concerned, I'd be okay re-signing Tyus Jones to be your backup point guard. I mean, he has a reputation of being a solid facilitator, like a Monte Morris type of player potentially from a few years ago. Okay, we kind of missed him the last few seasons since getting rid of him and then losing KCP, who was a part of that deal, you know. So bringing back a guy like Tyus Jones would be fine. I think Julian Strawther has to be in the rotation this year. He just has to be, right? If he's not going to be in the rotation, he needs to be a part of a trade package because he just can't be this third string guy for another year. This is like year 4 for him already. Too long. I think we talked about that when we were talking about the guards as well. So Strawther as your backup 2, I think I'd be okay with. Re-signing Spencer Jones as your backup 3. And then at the forward center kind of situation, I'd be okay with a Deron Holmes, Trayvon Brazile combination. Who plays what, I guess, is kind of up to rotations. My assumption would be that Brazile would maybe play more of the small ball 5 because Holmes likes to shoot the 3 and shoots the 3 better than Brazile currently does. So as far as the bench is concerned, that would be a bench that gives you just a little bit of everything. It's a very 3 and D type of bench in theory. Definitely more 3 than D for some of those guys. But I think it's a pretty solid balance overall. And then you got your floor general with Tyus Jones. And again, the Nuggets like to stagger guys. And so there's really never going to be a situation where you see all 5 of those bench guys on the court at the same time. It's just a matter of who fits well with the 2 or so starters that you're staggering with. So if you have Jamal and AG on the court, I'd be okay seeing Strawther, Spencer Jones, and a Trayvon Brazile or a Deron Holmes on the court with them at the same time. If you're staggering with Jokic and Cam Johnson, I'd be okay seeing Tyus Jones, Julian Strawther, or Spencer Jones, and a Deron Holmes or a Trayvon Brazile out there on the court with those guys. I'd be okay mixing and matching that particular situation. So as far as the bench is concerned, I'd be okay with that. And then at the third string, I mean, you still have Zeke Naji on this roster. He can be an okay third string 4 or 5. You have Bryce Hopkins as your third string 3. You have, I guess you'd probably have to pick up a 2 guard, probably maybe in free agency. Maybe there's an undrafted guy who kind of shows out, maybe like a Tamar Bates did last season. Unfortunate that he never really got an opportunity to play because he was injured the whole season with that foot injury. But maybe that's the type of situation you go out and find if you're the Nuggets to fill out your backup 2 guard spot. And quite honestly, I would love to see the Nuggets re-sign KJ Simpson. I was really impressed with his ability to just move the ball in the flow of our offense in such a short amount of time, getting acclimated to our system. Now, obviously, he didn't play a ton of minutes, but he's a hometown kid. He fills a role on this team, kind of like Tyus Jones, a more facilitation-oriented guard. He gets downhill pretty well as well for a guy who's only in his, second or third year in the league. I think he'd be a great third string point guard to re-sign. Obviously, he'd be an affordable third string guy to re-sign. And so at that point, maybe the Nuggets re-sign a guy like David Roddy if they wanted some more depth and didn't want backup 2 guard depth. But that's just a general situation that I'd be okay with the Nuggets pursuing. You get your starting lineup with the 5 guys that you're most comfortable with. You're good with the size in that starting lineup. The bench has pieces that you can plug in who are affordable, who are young, who have an emphasis. Julian Strawther has a shooting and scoring emphasis. Spencer Jones has a 3 and D emphasis, heavy on the D. You have guys like Deron Holmes and Trayvon Brazile who have skills that are yet to really be put to the test in consistent NBA minutes, but they have physical traits that you like. So as far as the makeup of that team, I'm okay with it. But we'll see what moves the Nuggets make. They're on out. Any other final comments before we wrap up today's episode?
Well, we know it all starts to go down next week, so I think we're in for. Everybody knows NBA free agency. There's that non-tampering period. I think it's actually kind of started. You started to see names getting released, and these guys have signed here. It goes fast and quick with the NBA, so don't blink because as soon as you do, you'll have missed it. But I think come past July 4th, that's next Saturday, I believe. You're probably a lot of these answers are probably going to be made already by then.
Yeah, hopefully so, likely so. And so next week's episode will be a very interesting one. If we're here, we'll see if we take next week off for 4th of July. But if not, whenever we're back, we'll probably have a lot to talk about. And I cannot wait to talk about it with you, my friend, as always. Thank you for everyone who listened to this episode. We hope you appreciated it. If you don't follow us on Instagram right now, go ahead and do so. We're starting to make more social media posts more often. Obviously, continue listening to this podcast. We post here, stream here, actually, every week, usually for about an hour. Today, it's an hour and a half because we're just that excited about all the stuff that's going on. But if you haven't subscribed to our channel, go ahead and do that. Please share this content if you enjoyed it as well. We're trying to grow the Nothing But Nuggets community here to become one of the largest fan-led Nuggets podcasts in the country. So if you like this content, please contribute to that cause. But until our next episode, we thank you for listening to this one, and we'll see you then. Till then, take care and peace out.